In a desperate bid to avoid prosecution, Donald Trump petitioned the Georgia Supreme Court to stop that state's investigation into his attempts to overturn the 2020 election, and they just shot him down. Intrigued? Then click that like, subscribe, and the alert bell, and maybe check out my Patreon link, and enjoy the video. So the consensus of everybody paying attention to Donald Trump's desperate attempt to secure the Republican nomination for the presidency in 2024 is that though he probably doesn't want the job, number one, because he sucks at it, number two, because it's a pretty demanding job, all things considered, Donald Trump recognizes two things. Number one, it's a really good way to enrich yourself because he didn't divest himself of his businesses in his first term, and he used the clout and the reputation of the presidency to enrich himself via Trump-related properties, number one. Number two, it's an even better way to avoid going to jail, to being prosecuted, okay, because of a long-standing Justice Department tradition of not allowing a sitting president to be indicted. It's the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card, and Donald Trump, in his cynicism and his narcissism, recognizes that fact. And as you and I both know, Donald Trump right now is legally under the microscope. He's been indicted already by Alvin Bragg out of New York. He's been indicted by Special Counsel Jack Smith for the willful retention of classified defense information. There's an ongoing investigation, a second part to Jack Smith's probe into Donald Trump pertaining to Trump's involvement with the January 6th insurrection. That will probably also lead to an indictment. And then the fourth big one is out of Fulton County, Georgia. You may recall, during the 2020 election, Donald Trump and his allies schemed to send fake electors to the Capitol so Mike Pence could certify these false electors, these illegal electors, to try to steal the election from Joe Biden. And he also made that allegedly perfect phone call, which we all heard because it went viral, in which he just bluntly asked Georgia election officials to find him one more vote than Biden got in Georgia. Guys, I'm not really asking for much. I don't see, fellas, I don't see what the big deal is. Just find me 11,780 votes. That phone call. Well, that investigation's been ongoing. And there was a special grand jury impaneled months ago. And even though it didn't have the power to indict, it could make recommendations to the district attorney in Fulton County, Fani Willis. They could make recommendations to her. And they recommended that she bring criminal charges, even though she's not obligated to do so. Now, two grand juries are being impaneled right now, which have the power to indict, and we don't know what they're going to find, but almost certainly I expect that there will be indictments to come from these two grand juries. So Donald Trump and his attorneys were trying to get ahead of it, and they actually did something similar with the special counsel investigation. But basically, they were like, hey, listen, they petitioned the Georgia Supreme Court and like, hey, stop this. So former President Trump asked two courts in Georgia to disqualify Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from investigating him. Trump's attorneys also asked the courts to quash the special grand jury report, which recommended criminal charges in Willis's probe of possible interference in the 2020 presidential election. Okay, again, though that wasn't a binding recommendation anyway, so it's kind of moot. But the notion was effectively that because Donald Trump is running for president, he shouldn't have to deal with this. The lawyers acknowledged that it was highly unusual to make a request directly to the state's Supreme Court, which reviews decisions made by lower courts. But they argued that Trump's status as a former president and a candidate in 2024 merited special consideration. If petitioner's case is not sufficiently extraordinary for this court to exercise jurisdiction, no case could be, they wrote. A spokesman for Willis's office declined to comment. Trump's attorneys did not immediately respond. Okay, so this was several days ago, okay, after they made the initial recommendation. Now, a few days after that, just today, the Georgia Supreme Court got back to Trump's attorneys, and they flatly rejected the petition. The Georgia Supreme Court on Monday unanimously dismissed a long-shot bid by former President Donald Trump to disqualify Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. Trump's lawyers had also asked the court to quash the special grand jury report, but there's no indication that's the case. Georgia Supreme Court ruled Monday unanimously dismissed a long-shot bid. The ruling from Georgia's highest court came just weeks before Willis, who led the investigation of possible efforts by Trump and his allies to interfere in President Biden's electoral victory in the Peach State, was expected to seek indictments. Trump's attorneys failed to show that the case presents one of the extremely rare circumstances that requires bypassing lower courts, the Supreme Court justices ruled. Therefore, the petition is dismissed. So again, what Donald Trump and his attorneys tried to do was basically argue that as a former president, he gets a jail out of free card, he shouldn't be prosecuted. As a candidate for the presidency, he gets a jail out of free card and shouldn't be prosecuted. And then, of course, as we discussed at the beginning of this video, as a sitting president, he wouldn't be prosecuted because, again, of a long-standing Justice Department tradition. The OLC opinion, I think, is back in the 70s, that you can't indict a sitting president. That's how crazy this is. That's the sort of authoritarian narcissism that's inherent to the MAGA cult and to Donald Trump. He literally thinks that no matter what, he should be able to literally get away with any crime. He famously said he should be, he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. This is merely an extrapolation of that. It's not just when he's president. Obviously, certain considerations should be made to sitting presidents because you don't want the nation's chief executive to be tied up in frivolous lawsuits or whatever. There should be a temporary sort of immunity for the sitting chief executive. That makes sense. But Donald Trump isn't the sitting chief executive. He's a former chief executive. But he says, listen, as a former president, I shouldn't have to deal with this. As a candidate for the presidency in a second term, I shouldn't have to deal with this. And as a sitting president, I shouldn't have to deal with this. So when would he be subject to law? When would he be subject to the nation's laws and subject to prosecution in violation of those laws? According to Trump and his attorneys, never. And that goes to show how ridiculous this cult has become.